So with the Zack Snyder Justice League cut being officially announced for 2021 on HBO Max, I thought I would look back on the original version of Justice League, which came out in 2017. I totally have not been working on this video for weeks now, and this news just happened to come out in the middle of me writing this. No, not at all. Justice League certainly was a movie, wasn't it? When the film came out, I saw it in cinemas and reviewed it, and I gave it quite a positive review. I didn't think it was amazing, but I had some fun watching it, and it pleasantly surprised me because I was expecting something horrendous. Now, about 2.5 years later, I decided to rewatch the film and see if my opinions were the same. And yeah, they changed a bit. Spoiler alert, if that's something I have to say for this film, let's get into this. Overall, when watching this movie, I could see why I had fun with it, and I didn't hate the experience of watching it. Like, this was not a grueling film to get through, but it was quite a bit worse than I remembered, on multiple levels. The main thing I noticed rewatching this movie was how cheap it looks. There's obviously this part of the film, don't worry, oh boy, will we get to that. But just nearly everything about this movie looks bizarrely cheap, and I think there are a few reasons for that. One of the main ones is color and lighting changes. It's pretty apparent from some of the shots in the trailers, and then how those shots turned out in the actual film, that at some point in this film's production, presumably after Joss Whedon stepped on board and they started reshooting a lot of it, the coloring and lighting of certain scenes were changed to make the movie lighter. And making a lighter movie isn't inherently bad, but when you take footage that was meant to be presented in a certain way and change that, it can end up looking weird. I think a great example is the Batsuit. In the darkness and shadow, it can look intimidating and badass. I'll give BVS that. Batman looks awesome in that movie, especially for that movie's style. In this film, in certain shots, it looks ridiculous. The mask looks puffy and squished onto Affleck's face, a bit like Captain America's mask in The Avengers, and the muscles look hilariously fake and almost made of styrofoam. And then the increased contrast in certain scenes just makes this movie look weird and cheap, like in Ghostbusters 2016, where the contrast was increased so much that it looked ridiculous. And then other stuff, I guess this can be put up to the reshoots as well. Maybe they didn't have that much more money to spend, as they had to keep shooting new stuff, but a lot of this movie just looks like it takes place on very obvious sets or green screens. Like the first scene with Batman feels so much like it's on a set. You never get the sense that these characters actually live in a real world. It feels like any minute they might crash into a matte painting in the background. And then onto the computer-generated effects. There are moments of absolutely horrendous green screen, particularly involving the character of Aquaman for some reason, that are just kind of crazy to see in a film with a $300 million budget. And other CGI just looks subpar. I know that it likely isn't that the visual effects people were just being lazy, but rather a time issue or a money issue or something like that, so don't get that wrong, but whatever reason it is, Steppenwolf and the Parademons look like video game characters, which makes the movie feel even more cartoonish, cheap, and takes you out of it. It also doesn't help that Steppenwolf has the character development equivalent to what you would imagine the buzzwords were that they wrote up on a whiteboard, like evil, wants to terraform Earth, big axe. Alright, great, that's it. There's even a little sliver of potential for his character to be interesting, with him having already failed and now really needing to prove himself. But that sentence I just said is about the extent to which that's developed. It's just said that that's his motivation, and nothing is ever really done beyond that. He looks like a generic villain, he has very generic villain dialogue, just one of the most bland superhero villains ever. Also, if we're talking about characters, I know I talked about Batman visually, but as a character, he is so bad in this movie. This is one of the worst versions of Batman in film. Not the Ben Affleck Batman as a whole, but the Batman in this movie is awful. I think if I had to sum up this Batman in one word, the first one that comes to mind is lame. Inconsistent would be another good one. Firstly, Ben Affleck's performance feels a lot like he's phoning it in, which I get he probably wasn't too psyched after what happened with the last one, but he just seems very bored and uninterested throughout most of the film. But the character doesn't help either. Bruce Wayne doesn't even feel like a character in this. He feels like a blank slate for whatever the writers need from him. We need someone to get the team together. Bruce. We need someone to tell the audience how important Superman was, even though it feels really unnatural coming from that character. Bruce. We need a cheesy joke here that again doesn't feel very natural with this character. Bruce. If you look at this in line with Batman v Superman, then this is absurd. It's a completely different character in so many ways. Just what his ideas and his character traits are different for a start, although that may be more of a comment on how this whole film disregards most of the previous DCEU stuff. But just in this film, on its own, there is nothing compelling about him as a character. He doesn't feel like Batman, or even a cool superhero, or even just a character. It feels like bored Ben Affleck just saying lines. The character of Batman is also uncharacteristically incompetent and stupid. Again, I don't care if you want to look at this from the perspective of continuity with the character in the previous films, or continuity with how this character is in the comics, or just this movie completely on its own. It makes for a very lame and unengaging character any way you look at it. He feels so much more useless in battle now, struggling to get rid of one parademon, or just picking up an alien gun and using that half the time. This feels like a portrayal of Batman that makes people ask, why is Batman on that team? He's just a human. And then there's the whole Superman angle, where Bruce constantly goes on and on about wanting to bring him back, which for this character, feels weird and forced. There is a way to handle Batman becoming more of a believer in Superman, but it would require A, more time to develop to feel natural, B, more nuance or subtlety to not feel so forced and in your face, and C, the entire rest of the DCEU to be rewritten as well. Because this movie acts like Superman was a beacon of hope, which is not at all the angle the previous films took. So it just leaves this confused universe without any real continuity in story or in tone. Also, Bruce Wayne is just a bit of a douchebag at points in this movie, and not in a cool, funny Tony Stark way, not in a particularly clever way. Just a lot of times when he's talking to Diana, you're just thinking, why is he saying this? He just comes across again, perfect word to describe him in this film, as lame. All of Batman's wisecracks also are not great.
Sorry, guys. I didn't bring a sword.
Well, I knew you didn't bring me back because you like me.
I don't... not... Jesus. He is tall. Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
And now we can talk about the humor in general in this film. The humor overall is not great. A lot of the humor feels like it's an SNL skit just dropped in the middle of the film, like Bruce talking to Aquaman about sending out a signal to fish. And a lot of the jokes feel like they should be accompanied by this sound effect. Especially the one-liners. A lot of it just feels out of place, or not very well delivered here. You can see the script behind the jokes, rather than it feeling like it's naturally coming from the characters. Some of these jokes are so awkward and stilted.
What was it like? Coming back?
Itchy.
The Flash is clearly supposed to be the comic relief character on the team, and to be fair, the fact that Ezra Miller is trying as Barry Allen makes his moments somewhat more bearable, but nothing he said really made me laugh. It feels a lot like laugh track comedy, like it should be followed by some of that canned studio laughter in that scripted sort of way. There are moments of unintentional hilarity, which I guess is where we can now talk about the mustache in the room. Everyone knows what happened at this point. Henry Cavill is Superman, Henry Cavill does Mission Impossible 6 with a mustache, Henry Cavill has to come back as Superman, but now they have to CGI out the mustache, and we got this. To be honest, the whole backstory to this is even funnier than how it turns out in the movie itself. This whole story of CGIing out someone's mustache genuinely feels like a plotline that should be in BoJack Horseman, not real life. But in the film itself, in the cinemas, it didn't really bug me for some reason. Like, you could tell something was up, but it wasn't really terrible. But rewatching it now, my god, it is so hilariously creepy and off-putting. Especially when he's supposed to be threatening Bruce or laughing with Lois. It is so frightening in the funniest way possible. I'm not sure why they didn't just CGI a beard on. This Superman has even had a beard before. It could have looked badass even. I guess there's the continuity with how he was when he died, but I think suspending our disbelief for that would have ended up better than this. This quote in the film also made me laugh, as I feel it sums up Warner Brothers' approach to this film on the whole quite nicely.
We might not have thought this through.
I want to talk about this movie's story and pacing for a bit. Firstly, how generic this story is really hurts it. It's a superhero story you feel like you've seen a million times. It feels almost like a superhero movie that should have come out in 2003 or something. I understand that most superhero movies are going to follow certain beats usually, just by being in the genre, but this one does it so much with so little other stuff going on that it feels like an AI just spit out what it thinks a superhero movie should have without any real feeling of emotion or of it being engaging. And that partially also leads to the film being incredibly surface level and hollow. It reminded me a bit of the last season of Game of Thrones, where very rarely anything in it made me feel much of anything. It felt like all the dialogue was just pushing the plot forward, going through the motions. There's no real substance to it. It's all just bare bones with no meat, no depth. It's like a first draft of bullet points and then that was just made into a film instead of developing anything. A Justice League team-up film could have been so cool, but due to the lack of build-up or good execution, you just feel nothing. When the Flash shows up on the rooftop and you're seeing these characters teaming up in costume for the first time, it could have been such a cool moment, but I didn't really feel anything. The pacing of the film is also not great, partly because Warner Brothers demanded the film be under 2 hours, so it feels quite rushed at points, which also contributes to this epic hero team-up not being very satisfying, or epic. There's also a severe lack of connectivity between the scenes in this film that makes it feel quite choppy and like a Frankenstein pieced together movie. Like, for example, after the opening credits, the first 3 or 4 scenes of this film could really just be swapped around and it wouldn't make any difference. It feels like the movie has like 4 opening scenes, reminding me a bit of this moment from The Office.
The most important part of a speech is the opening line. And when time is not a factor, I like to try out 3 or 4 different ones.
And that continues throughout. There are many scenes that just feel like they could be moved around randomly. Sometimes it feels like you're looking through a collection of deleted scenes of a film rather than a cohesive final product. The editing at times also isn't great. There are abrupt and unnatural transitions between scenes. It's a sloppily put together movie. One thing I said when I originally reviewed the film is that it reminded me of a live-action episode of Justice League, a show that I loved as a kid, and I still think to this day is the best animated superhero show. And I can understand why I made that comparison, because it does have a very simplistic plot and that sort of more lighthearted, fun tone and cheesy moments, but now I don't think that comparison is that fair. The Justice League show had multiple seasons to build up good characters, there was more natural fun, those episodes had more coherent visions, and they also looked better because they were animated and not live action with bad effects. I'd be lying if I said this film doesn't have some decent moments. A few effects are decent, some lines are decent, as I'll talk about a bit later, it is bearable. Like, it's not an irritating movie to watch, but pretty much any fun that comes out of it does just feel kinda bland. So while it does bear some similarities to the Justice League show, that show is so much better than this movie, and some of the things this movie carries over from that don't really work in this mess of a film, or the world this movie is supposed to be set in. The film also feels like it's trying really hard to set up a cinematic universe, a bit like a reverse MCU, set up all these characters from the big T movie, but because there's so little substance already in this as a film, it's quite transparent what they're trying to do. The whole underwater conversation where they discuss Aquaman's backstory, not only does it look terrible, but the dialogue and delivery feel like they're out of a high school play. It's completely out of place and awkward in how obvious it is that they're just trying to convey story information and set up Aquaman. It's bizarre to watch. J.K. Simmons, Billy Crudup, there are a lot of great actors in this who presumably were being set up to be in future films, but now those either won't happen, or it's unclear if they'll actually be in them. So it just ends up feeling like wasted talent in this. In terms of the main characters, I've already talked about Batman, and I'll talk about Superman and Cyborg a bit later. Like I mentioned, I didn't really find The Flash funny, but I kind of appreciated that Ezra Miller was trying at least. Also just want to mention, I did find it funny that The Flash runs like someone who's never run before. Jason Momoa, similarly, is clearly having a lot of fun and doing his best, which makes him one of the more enjoyable characters in here, although again, in terms of his actual character, there's not a ton to be said. I still stand by that it's kind of funny how cool they try to make Aquaman, because he's known as such a lame character, so they have to go super over the top with Icky Thump and slow-mo and throwing the whiskey on the ground. But I kind of enjoyed that a little, because at least it's something. Unlike with Batman, for example, at least Aquaman feels like his character has a direction, or a character. No matter how over the top or possibly out of place in the film it may feel, at least it's something. Wonder Woman is not great in this movie, Gal Gadot's performance in this film isn't very good,
Kal-El, no!
And the number of times she mentions Steve Trevor is almost comical. It feels quite shoehorned in. Like, Wonder Woman was successful, so let's reference that film over and over again, because people liked it. And that's pretty much all the depth her character gets in this. I mentioned this earlier, but they're just weird moments of the heroes either being incompetent, or just acting in a bizarre way that again makes the script feel a bit lazy. Like the team just leaving the mother box sitting out there when Superman is resurrected. I know Superman's back, but you would think one of them, especially considering there's supposed to be some very intelligent people on this team, would stop for 1 second and say, okay, we'll deal with this while one of us, maybe someone who's pretty fast, if we have someone like that, goes and gets that mother box real quick. I know the plot needs to move forward, or the heroes need to struggle, but it'd be best if the reason wasn't just, yeah, they didn't think of that. Again, reminded me a bit of Game of Thrones Season 8.
Tyrion is smart, but I guess not that smart.
The conversation where Aquaman is just yelling at Bruce Wayne about being Batman in front of all these people is also odd. They fire a missile while being underneath Gotham Harbor. It just all feels very staged, and like you can see the outline of the script. Like, they have to get into this action scene. How do we get there? Just have them do this. Which again, takes you out of the film. The lack of development for these characters or this world also leads to moments that should be fun falling flat. Like Superman and Flash working together, or Cyborg and Superman laughing. If we had any real connection to them, or if this felt like a real movie we were invested in, those might have been fun moments, but it just doesn't really hit home. And again, on that lack of development, Cyborg as a character is actually alright, but his character arc isn't satisfying or seemingly really completed. Again, it's a case of touching on something that could be interesting and just kind of acknowledging that it's there, but not really going into it. Same with the side story about Bruce Wayne being too old to be Batman. This being cut down under 2 hours is sort of a blessing and a curse, because it makes this not good movie easier to sit through, but it also leads to a lot of plot points not getting any development. The obvious solution is make a movie that fits its runtime and is good. I realize that's easier said than done, but hey, we'll see with the Snyder Cut. I'm curious to see what changes will be made there, and if it shows that if this movie hadn't been cut down, it would have been much better, or if it being cut down was actually just sparing us more of a bad movie. There are also going to be lots of other changes in that, I'm assuming. I would have been fine if we never saw it, but I am honestly curious to see how it turns out. And I will say this on the Zack Snyder DCEU movies, mainly BVS. Whether or not I would rank it higher than this, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a fan of that movie for completely different reasons to this one. On the one hand, this one is more fun and easier to sit through, but on the other hand, and this is where I gotta give Snyder credit, at least he made a movie that was fully his vision. That is a Zack Snyder movie through and through, and whether you agree with the creative decisions made, you can tell that there was someone behind all this guiding it with real purpose, unlike this movie. That doesn't make up for all the problems BVS had, but at least it feels like more of a real movie than this. And it did actually make me feel something. That something wasn't necessarily good, but again, at least it was something. Also, I don't know where to put this in the video, so I'll drop it in here. Real quick, here's just a compilation of some of the lines in this film that were so cheesy or poorly written that they made me either laugh or cringe.
This isn't the plan.
No, Master Wayne.
This is the team.
You would have been very disappointed in me. I wasn't Lois Lane, dedicated reporter.
I don't believe it. What are you?
A believer.
Also, speaking of the Snyder Cut and why so many fans demanded it, I can understand why some people who loved the DCEU before this would dislike this movie. For fans of BVS, this is such a dramatic tonal shift and shift in how these characters acted the last time we saw them. There's a way to shift a franchise's tone, but this was done so sharply and poorly that I can see why DCEU fans would hate it. They changed this franchise to appeal to people who didn't like the DCEU movies before this, but that didn't work because the movie isn't good even though it is lighter in tone. And then the DCEU fans didn't like that tone shift, so no one was pleased, really. I also want to acknowledge, before people ask about it, I have seen some discussion about Warner Brothers releasing the Snyder Cut being a bad move, because it gives validation to some of the more toxic ways some fans were campaigning for this thing to be released. And to be honest, I did find myself thinking something similar when I first heard this news. But then there's the other angle, where there were people who wanted this movie and were campaigning for it in much more positive ways, for example, involving charities. There is definitely a discussion to be had there, but I think that's a whole separate topic for another time. I'm just here to talk about the original film. I also want to touch on the action scenes here, which, while definitely not all of them are terrible, quite a few of them are not great, to put it mildly. Look, okay, the flash effect is pretty awesome. The music in this scene is pretty good too. But besides that, a lot of the action feels quite clunky and slow and not very exciting or real looking. And for what was supposed to be such a big team-up event movie, the action scenes just feel very unspectacular. There isn't much creativity here, a lot of it doesn't look that real, especially the final fight. It just looks like it's on different green screens again. You never really get the sense that anyone is standing in an actual location. There's also never really a sense of danger, not only with Superman stepping in to save the day, but also most of these characters seem pretty invincible in general. Like Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Flash, they're just bouncing around and hitting walls and never really seem fazed by anything. There's never really any kind of suspense or tension. Also, making the entire finale red makes it a bit of an eyesore. I don't know if it would have looked better with the original darker colors. Maybe they were trying to make it more unique, since lots of DCEU movies end with dark black-gray kind of color schemes, but the way they did it, it's just not very pleasant to look at. As far as Superman's role in this film, okay, taking out the mustache part, we just look at him alone, without a lot more context that we're going to look at in a second. I actually do quite like this version of Superman. Henry Cavill plays him quite well, the over-the-top cheesiness and optimism fits the character, the brightness of the costume, it feels like a pretty proper modern live-action version of the character. Where he falters is his role in this movie. The whole story of Bruce wanting to bring back Superman because he's the only one that can bring the team together and the only one who can defeat Steppenwolf is such a weird angle to approach this kind of team-up movie from, because it makes the Justice League team element feel kind of pointless, or at the very least not as exciting. Narratively speaking, if you want to build up this team dynamic, they should work as a team to save the day, but then they get a power-up at the end that is completely invincible and defeats the villain with ease. That's just not very engaging or fun from a story perspective. And it's also a weird lesson for a team movie. We can work together as a team and not be that effective, but then we can raise a super powerful being from the dead and it'll just save the day. Yes, there is a little bit of teamwork here and there after Superman shows up, but overall, the movie makes it feel like, basically, Superman could have just done this on his own. I know some people will compare this to Thor showing up in Infinity War, but there are a lot of differences with these two. The main one being, in Infinity War, there's still some sense that they could lose, which keeps it engaging. Like, one example with what's happening on Titan in the meantime. And they do lose. In this, when Superman shows up, if, let's just say, the audience was invested in this film at that point, there's no real excitement from there on out. It just feels like, alright, we're done. And of course, everything else I've talked about, like bad effects and unengaging characters and a dull story, also hurt that finale. The moment where Superman turns up is kind of fun, with the music and that line.
I believe in truth, but I'm also a big fan of justice.
But again, that's only really if you view that moment alone. In the same way that this movie could be cited as an example when some people ask, why is Batman on the team? He's just a human. It also shows why some people would ask, why is there ever a problem in this world if Superman is just invincible? Like, there are lots of ways to make Superman an interesting character and interesting in action scenes, by depowering him, or putting him against a stronger villain, or in some foreign environment, or with other stakes going on at the same time, or something. Here, he shows up and saves the day. It feels like when little kids play with their action figures. Like, and then Superman comes in and stops the bad guy. There isn't really a proper payoff or satisfying resolution. I will say, the whole Superman coming back scene, besides how visually it's not great and it has some not good acting in there, it does have its fun moments. Like when Superman looks at the Flash, that is one of the very few moments in this film that is organically and unironically a fun, cool moment that made me smile. Alright, now after all that blasting of this movie, why do I still not hate this film? Well, I've mentioned a few little positive things in this film throughout this video, and there are some other minor things that aren't that bad. Some of the performances aren't bad, I've already mentioned a few. Jeremy Irons is solid, and on the rewatch, I actually quite liked Ray Fisher's performance. I thought he did a pretty good job acting in this. I also think some of the costumes are actually decent, like the ones that are suited for the way the movie is shot and lit and color corrected, like the Flash costume. Actually quite cool in this. The cyborg effects also aren't that bad for quite a bit of the film, and while a lot of this looks super cheap, there are some shots in here that are decent. This moment between Flash and Batman.
Save one person.
Which one?
Don't talk, don't fight. Get in, get one out.
And then?
You'll know.
That's a pretty good moment. And overall, the main reason that I still don't hate this film is, despite how many problems it has, it isn't horrendous to the point where I wanted to turn it off. Like, it has some entertainment value, or it's not boring. It's mindless, but it's not unbearable. It is watchable. It's under 2 hours, which likely hurt the pacing of the film, but on the plus side, it's over pretty fast. And it's not boring. I never felt trapped while watching it. Yes, it's bad, but it's dumb and silly and fast-moving enough that it isn't horribly boring at least. Is that a compliment to this movie? Barely. That does not make it a good movie, but it does have some merit from an entertainment standpoint in its lighthearted, more fun tone, and I'd also much rather rewatch this than, say, a terrible blockbuster movie that just goes on for like 2.5 hours. Why did I enjoy this movie as much as I did when I saw it in cinemas? I think there are a few reasons. One, as much as I try not to let my personal life interfere with my movie reviews, I can't deny that I was having a great day the day I saw this film, and I was in a perfect mood to see a movie. And a film that was so light and breezy and didn't really require any thought while watching it worked pretty well off that mood. Two, those two post-credit scenes left me in a good mood when I was leaving the cinema. They're quite fan-servicey, but the first one is a classic, fun DC moment, and the second one just got me excited because I love the idea of a supervillain team going up against a superhero team, which even in the MCU we haven't really seen yet. Even though I'm not a big fan of the DCEU versions of some of these characters, seeing Joker, Luthor, some members of the Suicide Squad, Deathstroke, and other villains we'd seen team up and go against the Justice League, to be honest, I would be more excited to see that than them fighting Darkseid. Although I will say, that last Lex Luthor line did kinda give me Carnage and Venom vibes.
Shouldn't we have a league of our own?
3, this also set up a future for this world, and with this cast and these heroes, I think I was excited by the potential that was possible after this, in that I feel they could make better and cooler movies going forward. Like I said, I loved the Justice League cartoon growing up. When I was a kid, I was always more of a fan of DC than Marvel. So the idea of seeing those characters and that more comic book world lived out on the big screen, I imagine it's how people who loved the Marvel comics growing up felt about the possibility of seeing all of that unfold on the big screen. So I think the ending promising more things to come left me a bit excited leaving the cinema. And 4, like I just mentioned, while technically it's a mess, visually it's poor, dialogue and story-wise it's basic to bad, and it only has a few redeeming moments, it isn't unwatchable. In conclusion, well, that really was the conclusion. I didn't really enjoy watching Justice League the second time around, definitely not as much as I did when I first saw it, and even when I first saw it, I wasn't crazy about it, I just sorta had a good time with it, which I still think is understandable. It is a huge mess of a film, as a result of lots of different things. It's either bland, generic, or simply bad, with very few moments of goodness shining through. But at the same time, I can understand why I enjoyed it when I saw it in cinemas, and it isn't the worst film in the world. It has a bit of value from a pretty mindless entertainment standpoint. If you like this movie, more power to you. Enjoy what you enjoy. There's absolutely no shame in that. So, those were my thoughts on Justice League now that a bit of time has passed and I rewatched it. What do you think of this film? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.